Now are we good?
Sound check. 1, 2, 3.
One of the Trigger Warning podcast. I'm Selena, and this is my co-host Tori. You've already seen the warnings, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory based on the title and the trigger warnings listed out. But if you're easily triggered by any of the topics listed on the trigger warning page, or easily triggered in general, this is probably not the podcast for you, and you can't say we didn't warn you. If it's a touchy subject, we're probably going to talk about it. We have a structured outline for our show thanks to my co-host and strategic planning producer, Tori, who has done an amazing job with our outlines and plan structure. I'm so thankful for her and the work that she's put into this project alongside of me. However, due to this being our first episode, we're expecting to exceed timing expectations and veer off a little to give our listeners a solid vibe of what to expect with the TWP. What's up, Tori? How are you feeling today?
As I've said, I always have two different moods. One is constant panic and one is it is what it is. Today is right in the middle, actually. I have my makeup turned out nice and I'm wearing my favorite podcast shirt, which is Crime Junkie Podcast. A little shout out to them. And my kids have been so good today. No fist fights, nothing. And it's just been a good day.
Good. I haven't slept but maybe 6 hours in the last 2 days. And it's been those kind of days where, you're only going to get sleep if you cut off all oxygen to your brain. And I couldn't do that because we had a show to do today. So here I am.
Man, I could go for a good coma, because as you know, I think I had food poisoning, so we had to delay it a little bit, but yeah, we could go for a good coma right about now.
Yeah, like a 2-week one for sure.
Oh, man, that sounds so heavenly.
I know. All right, so again, like I said, my name is Selena. I'm 28 years old and I'm married to the person I've been sleeping with for the last 14 years. My high school sweetheart, if you will. I want to preface this episode by saying my traumas didn't stem from my parents and the way that they raised me. I was raised in a 2-parent household, and my trauma that I have kind of stems from my own experiences growing up and being misdiagnosed and mistreated for many years, and then just some generational trauma, not from the way I was raised, not from how my parents treated me or anything like that. My mother was a teen mom and we grew up together as I was the oldest of 3. My mother is my best friend. She is my whole world and then some. I'm really passionate about this project and the content we're going to be delivering with this show because I have an 18-year journey with my mental health. At the age of 10, I started having thoughts that a normal 10-year-old should not be having. And I had this journal, and it was, do you remember those password journals where you say the password and then you open it and you write in it?
Yeah, that's the one that I broke into that one time at your house to find out all of your secrets.
Yeah. Well, you miss a lot of the darkness of.
I just got your crush's name, and it was not as juicy as I thought it would be.
Yeah, and then I broke into yours, I'm pretty sure, to get back at you.
You did.
But yours was not password protected. It was easy to get into.
It was just a notebook in a terribly hidden spot under my pillow, I believe. So
yes, it was terribly hidden. So I'm very glad that my parents didn't invade my privacy because they would have seen a lot of things, about the darkness that was in my head and the things that I was thinking at the age of 10. I tried to suffocate myself with my pillow. I was cutting myself in middle school. I was cutting my wrists, and I wasn't doing it for attention. Nobody knew I was cutting myself. And when I brought up self-harm to my psychiatrist, that I see today. I was bringing up how, because I cut myself more recently as well, and I was discussing how it wasn't an act of trying to KMS, it was more of taking the pain from my brain to a different part of my body. And she said that many people who self mutilate, she called it self mutilating. Doesn't that kind of take you back a little bit?
It's such a severe way of thinking of it. Like you're changing yourself
Mhm.
because of something going on, and it seems more harmful than just saying self-harming. It is really
Yeah.
a different way to look at it.
Exactly. And I was when she said self-mutilating, I was really taken back by it, and it really drove home the severity of what I was doing to my body. But like I said, if my parents had been the kind of parents to invade my privacy, I think my journey would have turned out a lot differently. I think I may have been put in a hospital, a state facility, and I don't think that I would have come out of that in better shape than I went into it, because if you look up a lot of reviews of state facilities and even private facilities, you see a lot of reviews where people come out
Mhm.
with worse traumas than when they went in. And that is a huge, huge problem in our society. And when it comes to mental health. So I'm glad that my journey did go the way that it did. I'm glad that I got to present it to my parents in the way that I could present it to my parents. Even though it has been a long journey for me. I I'm just glad that they didn't see it before I had a chance to talk about it. And when I did bring it up to my parents, I did get two different reactions. I brought it up as like anxiety because I could
Mhm.
not express any further, like how the thoughts that were going through my head and how I was truly thinking. And my dad brushed it off as, he said, "You're too young to be experiencing anxiety." And my dad is an immigrant. Him and my grandmother came to the United States as immigrants to start a better life for themselves. And if you know anything about immigrants, you know that they go through a lot to get, to start that better life. And so
Mhm.
he's so thick-skinned that it just he mental health isn't present in his family in the way
No.
that it was present in me. So my mom understood a lot more because mental health presents itself in my mother's side of the family. I didn't know this until I got much older, but my grandfather and my aunt, who is no longer with us, they both suffered from manic bipolar depressive disorder, which is actually now called bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, which is a newer way to
Mhm.
refer to the illness. And it's much harder to differentiate between the two because unfortunately there's not as many studies behind the disorders as there are other mental health disorders and psychiatric illnesses. My mother took me to our family care practitioner who was also an OBGYN, delivered babies. He was a dermatologist. He really just didn't have enough time
No,
for
he was
me.
a
So
one
it was
size
like,
fits all doctor.
exactly. So it was like in and out. I brought up my anxiety and he prescribed an as needed anxiety medicine, which was a benzodiazepine. And those are nowadays prescribed with SSRIs, long-term
Mhm.
anxiety and depression medications. The way that he prescribed an as needed medication without prescribing an SSRI, that would never happen these days. And he would get in a lot of
No.
trouble for that. And I was only 11 years old taking strictly a benzo. And for his sake and my sake, he's lucky that I don't have an addictive personality in the sense of substance abuse. Um, but after many years of doctors, psych nurses, behavioral specialists, counseling, in 2021, right before I hit my worst mental health episode I've ever been through, which I'm sure stemmed from many years of being misdiagnosed, mistreated. It led up to this. I found a psychiatrist that truly, truly saved my life, because she was going to this facility and seeing the psychiatrist was like my last ditch effort. I felt like I was going off the rails, and I truly didn't know what that meant for me. I just knew I was feeling the most off I'd ever felt in my entire life. And I'm telling you, walking into this first appointment and sitting down in front of her, she's a telepsych. I knew just by looking at her that she had read my entire story. She had went through my history, seen how long I'd been going through this journey, and she was ready to hear me. And this was the first time I truly felt heard, seeing this woman this woman was ready to listen and hear me and do everything in her power. I walked out of that appointment that day crying with the most relief I have felt in years. And during my recovery, I was reading a lot of self-help books and started a blog, which I'm pretty disappointed in myself because that blog was pretty unrealistic. And that's the opposite of what this podcast project is to us. This podcast is going to be real, raw, straight to the point, and
Dark.
Dark. We're going to cover so many things, cross so many lines with the dark sense of humor. It's really going to be a huge twist on my blogs. I shut that page down because I was doing routines that I'd read in a self-help book and then writing about them the very next day. And then I didn't stick to the routine for more than probably 2 days. Like, I made my bed and I looked at my bed and I'm like, wow, my bed looks really comfortable. And the whole point of making your bed in the morning is so that you don't end up back in your bed later on. Like,
Okay.
you start your day productive. Well, I looked at my bed and I'm like, wow, that looks really comfortable. I'm getting back into bed.
See, I use science to prevent myself from making my bed, because if you put the covers back on, light cannot enter underneath the covers, and you have more of a chance for mites to grow without the light hitting that. And I'm just saying, science backs a reason to not make your bed.
I have never heard somebody put it into that perspective, but you're 100% right, man.
Like, don't fact check me, our wonderful listeners. I just kind of heard this somewhere, but I mean, it's a good reason to just get out of bed
Yeah.
and scooch on out.
Solid ass reason for sure. But in one of these self-help books, I remember it saying, quit your job, travel the world, find your passion. And that truly is not realistic for so many of us in this economy. Inflation.
Absolutely not. Yeah,
Are
my
you
paycheck,
serious?
I'm gonna have enough money to go to McDonald's and order off of, we don't even have a dollar menu anymore, do we? And come back home. That's what it's gonna support.
Yeah, that's gonna have to be your self-help, because
Mm-hmm.
guess what? I did quit my job and I sure as hell did not have enough money to be traveling the world and finding whatever my passion was gonna be. So I found Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F
F-bomb.
book. And I wouldn't categorize, I think it is in the genre of self-help related books, but I wouldn't really categorize it as self-help, because this book really laid it on me. It really opened my eyes. He talks a lot about the mind and society and psychology, and I'm really interested in psychology and sociology, and it really just punched me right in the face. And I have the book here with me right now, and I love the book so much. You can't tell it's the book because I took the cover off of it, but I love the book so much that I got the follow-up journal, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F journal. And as you can see, I have a page bookmarked and I'm not finished with it yet, but I also have other pages bookmarked to go back to because I loved what he had to say in the part of the journal so much that I like to read back at those things. But he sets you up with a scenario and reactions to a scenario and how you could have reacted or responded differently to that scenario, and then has you do the same thing. Write
Okay.
a specific scenario that you could have reacted differently to, and then write about that, and then go and write how you could have reacted differently to that scenario. And it is one of the best prompt journals I have ever used in my entire life. And I love prompt journals. And I'm now reading his second book called Everything is Effed. And I don't know how many books he has now. I think maybe he has 3, but he might only have 2. But if you have never read this book and you like reading self-help stuff, but you feel the same way we feel, because if you are listening to this podcast, I'm sure you do feel the same way we feel. Give this book a read and then buy the journal, because you will be blown away and you'll be punched in the face a couple times, because it is so raw, realistic, and straight to the point. Another reason that this project is so important to me, due to my journey, I have since become a member of the National Alliance of Mental Illness, which is a national organization that provides so many resources, and there's locations within any area that you live in. You can look up the closest location. They have meetings. You can even write articles and submit articles to them that they will actually post on their website, and I'm in the process of doing that. I am a member of the American Suicide Prevention Organization, and I am a peer support specialist for my sister and someone whose privacy I must respect, and so their name won't be released. But if you do need any peer support, please do not hesitate to DM me on any of our platforms directly, or our Trigger Warning Podcast email. Our platform tags are listed on one of the intro pages and the page at the end of the podcast app. I am not authorized to provide counseling or medical advice, but I can offer plenty of support and advice based off of my 18-year journey. And nothing shared from anyone who is looking for peer support will be discussed on our podcast without permission. However, we will have a form in our platform episode bios for any listeners to share their stories anonymously and provide episode ideas. And we'd love to hear any ideas you have, so please use and abuse that form. This podcast is also going to provide many resources, and if anything is discussed that aren't stories directly related to our personal lives, or stories listeners provide us to share, or stories our guests share, we will source the resources in our episode descriptions.
Yes, and another thing about being anonymous, if you want us to maybe give you a name to call you, to refer to you as, that would be wonderful, because I did just speak to somebody that I know, who wanted to speak about something for our upcoming episode, and I said, okay, what do you want me to call you? I think that just helps us a little bit and helps our listeners. So if you have a funny, hilarious name you want us to call you, go for it. I would love to say like Kitty Cat 23,
Of
wanted to
course.
tell us about
Or
their story.
Sexy Kit 123.
I would have so much joy. It would just bring so much joy to me.
Same. All right, Tori, take it away.
Absolutely loved your introduction, Selena. There's many things I knew about you, since we have been friends for 15 years, and it's just so relieving to know that somebody who I have known for 15 years, did go through some of the same things that I went through, because I am also 28 years old. Married to the love of my life for 8 years. We've been together for 12, also high school sweethearts. I'm the elder podcast host. So
By 2 months, 2 months only.
but Bolden Elder podcast, that's a new one, podcast host. My husband and I have two children. They are amazing, stubborn, smart, intelligent, embodiments of terror, the true definition of Sour Patch Kids. They are going to look me in the eye, maybe flip me off, and then give me a hug. And I could not love them more than I already do.
I
Um,
love that.
but they and you've met them. Uh, and I love them so much because they do help me get through the day, and as a mom, sometimes you live for your kids. And I have struggled with my mental health for years and years when I was a kid. I'm the youngest of five. So I was just this anxious Chihuahua type person. If you think of a Chihuahua, they're feisty. They shake constantly, and the smallest sound can scare them, but they are going to bite your ankles. And that's me. That is me as a person. I am so scared, but you know what? Now I'm mad. Now I'm feisty. Um, but as a child, everybody took care of me. I was the youngest. And this kind of culminated into me having more of an attachment issue on top of my anxiety I already had. I can remember not being able to sleep in my own bed because I had shared a room with siblings for so many years. And when the oldest sibling had moved out when I was around 10 years old, I got my own room. And this was catastrophic. I was unable to sleep alone. I tried sleeping with a TV, a sound machine, fan, and it eventually, I was just sleeping on the couch. And I don't remember sleeping in my own bed by myself until I was probably about 15 years old. And as we were friends in middle school. And that was probably the only time I slept in my own bed was when I had a friend stay the night. Um,
Hmm.
I just could not do it. And so finally, my mother, I love her to death. She is just amazing. None of my mental health, I think, stems from the way I was raised. Again, just like you, like my parents were great and loving, but there is a family history of mental health issues in my family. So my mom did take me to the doctor, and I think I was around 11 or 12 at the time. And we spoke to this doctor, and they actually put me on medicine for insomnia. So, not anxiety. So, here I am at 12 years
I
old
remember
taking a
that.
sleep med. It was awful. I was drowsy, but still unable to sleep, heart racing, just could not function. And although this didn't affect me in day-to-day life because at school, I was so busy, I was doing things, I couldn't really have that anxiety, like out and about around other people. But when I was home, it was suffocating. And it culminated to when I was 17, I had my first boyfriend. He is in the living room, not kidnapped, not bound up. He's my husband now. But he is in the living room. He's great. I love him. And at 17, I told my mom, "Hey, I have a serious boyfriend. I think I need to get on birth control." So, you know what? I'm going to pat myself on the back for that. That was very mature for me at 17.
Hmm.
But I went to the family doctor who I still see today, and I cannot say enough good things about this woman. She is amazing. She will listen and she will pin down what an issue is. And she finally diagnosed me with anxiety. So at 17, I was taken off of the sleep med, which I really hadn't taken routinely in years because of the way it made me feel. And I was put on Prozac, and that was life changing for me. Um, and I found out later that my whole family suffers from anxiety, depression, bipolar, and ADHD. And ADHD is actually one of the biggest issues in my family. I have so many nieces and nephews. I honestly don't even know. If I had to count them up, it would be in the 20s. And um, a lot of my nephews are diagnosed ADHD. My brother is diagnosed ADHD. I have cousins diagnosed with ADHD on both sides of my family, actually. But most of the mental health issues stem from my father's side of the family. And as I grew up, I realized we were hiding it. It was a family secret. Like we just ignored it. It was, oh yeah, that's how they are. They're sad. Or that person's just, a little over the top, a little high maintenance. And that's how we had described depression and anxiety as I was growing up. So I work with children. My mother's worked with children for 30 plus years. And at 26 years old, I was like, hey, something else is going on. It's not just anxiety with a sprinkling of depression, like a little cherry on top, depression on the anxiety. And I was speaking to my mother about this because we've worked with children for years. And I'm like, man, I think I'm ADHD. So I spoke to my mother about this, and God bless this woman. I love her to death. She tells me in the sweetest accent she has that says, of course I know you have ADHD. I've known since you were 10. You're just not as bad as your brother. I love her.
I
I do.
love
I love
when you
her.
do impressions of your mother, and she hates it so much, but it's so funny.
It really is my favorite thing to do because my mom is, Southern and my dad is Midwest. So they came together, and you've noticed there's some words I don't say correctly. Never knew this until my adult life, by the way. Had no clue. Maybe we'll do a
Adult
whole
being
segment.
one of them.
Adult, that's how you say adult. But, but maybe we'll do a little segment on all the words I can't pronounce. But so I went to my doctor, and she diagnosed me with ADHD, and finally understanding what I had gave me those skills and that knowledge to be like, okay, this is how I cope with it. This is how I deal with it. And it was really nice to already have this background of children I worked with and knowing how they are supposed to deal with it, how we treat them, and how we give them those tools. And I was like, hey, I can use these tools too. So that's one thing that this podcast is really going to be for me, is advocating for mental health in youth. Because when we were kids, like you had said, your dad said you were too young, and I love your dad. He's wonderful. And I know that was just the mentality back then. And the fact that you could only describe it as anxiety, we didn't have resources. We didn't have things that would tell us, okay, this symptom could be this, or, I've spoken to this maybe with a school counselor or another person in your life as a child, and they gave me these tools, because we didn't have that. There's one thing I can specifically remember from high school. If you remember our high school counselor, I had gone in after having broken up with a terrible boyfriend, also the husband, and I was going through, he was only terrible for the month we were broken up. And I had gone to the counselor because I had picked up some habits that were not good. Um, I was smoking cigarettes to avoid eating meals. And it was something that it was a vice for me. And I went in, and I'm speaking to her, and I'm pouring my heart out. I'm bawling. I'm telling her everything. And she slid me a brochure for college and said, well, have you thought about what college you want to go to?
Wow.
And this is one thing that I'm like, we cannot step on the feelings that children and young adults, or even high schooler age, are having, because it can really knock them back. So in my mind, that was my first experience of seeing somebody that just did not care. Um, so one of the things I will be doing with this podcast will be advocating for information and diagnosis to be put out for children and youth.
hmm And I want to piggyback off of what you said about how your entire family has ADHD, and
Mm-hmm.
how you didn't discover it until you were much older. And I was watching and I can't link this resource because I can't remember what I was watching it on, but I was watching a mental health professional discuss how there is a whole generation called the lost
Mm-hmm.
women, because in the early 60s and 70s, the studies of ADHD were only done on little boys, and they didn't know what they know now. And now they know that ADHD presents itself differently in boys and girls, and presents itself differently by age as well. So now there are
Yes.
many more studies out there, and a lot of people talk about why are so many people getting diagnosed with ADHD? Well, it's because there were so many people who were masking it at a young age, so many
Mm-hmm.
women specifically who
Yes.
didn't present the hyperactivity or inability to focus, who went under the radar and never got diagnosed and treated properly for that.
Exactly. And I do want to add a little bit of detail from my line of work. The difference between boys that have ADHD and girls, you can see a difference in how those symptoms arise. Now, there are some girls that will have those exact textbook symptoms of ADHD with the hyperactivity, but same with autism. Autism presents itself so much differently in boys in a lot of cases than in girls, and it's harder to diagnose it. And I think that is one thing that needs to be looked into more and advocated more for women and girls to understand what they may be going through.
Mhm. Yeah, and the same thing with autism. A lot of women went undiagnosed with autism as well because,
Hmm.
again, like you said, it presents itself much differently. So I'm glad that there are more studies being done on these things because people are finally being able to be themselves and be treated
Yes.
properly for things that they weren't treated properly for years. And we're coming a long way, but we've still got a long way to go.
Yes, I mean, I love how far we have come with mental health and diagnosing and understanding it, but I do feel there's so much more to do. And I hope that's one thing we can talk about and cover in our podcast.
Oh, for sure. I'm going to talk about toxic positivity here, and toxic positivity is just not healthy. And personally, I believe that everyone's feelings and perspectives on things are valid. And when just sucks, or when somebody goes through a difficult situation, in or
Hmm.
time in their lives, just let things be as they are. Stop with the, well, things could always be worse, or nobody is given challenges that they can't handle, or exercise, eat better, blah blah blah. I used to
Yes.
be an avid I used to be an avid runner every single morning from ages 17 to 19. And during that time, I cut out preservatives. I was eating all organic, and I cut out gluten from my diet. Aside from the running, my diet was because my mom was instructed to cut out all of those things due to being very sick. And they thought that she may have a gluten intolerance, and she had to track what she was eating and how often she was getting sick. And I did this with her because I didn't want her to feel alone in that aspect. And I felt like it would be really good for me and really healthy for me. But
Hmm.
instead, this led me down a very dark, dark road because I am prone to self harm and self destruction. I became obsessed with the scale from ages 18 to 21. I had a severe eating disorder that just got progressively worse as time went on. I was brutal to my body. And because of that, once I started eating semi normally, I destroyed my body and gained more weight. And I
Hmm.
gained the most weight I had ever gained in my entire life. And it was, it took me back, caused so much depression. And my body is still not the same. I mean, I've lost all that weight since, but my body is so much different now. The eating disorder and those habits still live within me, and
Hmm.
I still do not have great eating habits at all. And that's a perfect example of how mental illnesses do not present the same way in everyone, and why the same advice does not work for every mentally ill person. And
I completely agree with that.
before I move on, I do want to talk about my experience with BetterHelp therapy. Again, this episode is not sponsored, and I'm not reading from a script. I'm reading from my own notes and my own experience. I've used BetterHelp twice now, and I'm still currently using the service. The only reason I did have to stop the first time is because I left my job during my psychotic break due to needing the time to allow the treatments to work, and I needed the time to recover. I no longer had the funds to support the therapy. So the second time I signed up, I still didn't have the funds to pay full price. And I emailed back and forth with customer support, and I wish I could remember the name of the woman that I was emailing with, because I would shout her out right now, because she played a huge part in saving my life, because I needed that service. I was signing up again, obviously, because I needed that service. And she made sure that I would be able to afford that service. And I did not, and still am not, paying full price for that service. And she made it extremely affordable for me. My experience with my counselor has been unlike any other therapy experience I've ever had. After my appointments with my current psychiatrist, she asked me for updates. We talk about everything I need to talk about. I get journal reminders sent to my email. And the best thing about the journaling is that you can have private journals where you just journal and it's only you that can see them, or you can allow your counselor to read your journal entries after you've entered them. And I'm sure a lot of us who have gone to counseling or seek professional help for mental health, or even just going to a doctor, it's hard to remember what you really wanted to talk about. And
Yes, especially those that have
so
ADHD. We cannot, where it's going to be there and gone the next second.
exactly. So allowing my therapist to read through some of my journal entries helps me remember what I want to talk about in the next session. And you can also change your counselor at any time if you and your current counselor just aren't vibing the way that you want to vibe, and it's at no cost, no questions asked by your next counselor. The service program is made to cater to your needs. And I have nothing but amazing things to say about this service. So if you're looking to start with BetterHelp and you just simply can't afford it, or you're just on the edge, first of all, if you're on the edge, go for it, because you can do it from the comfort of your own home. You don't even have to wear pants, and you don't even actually have to use the camera. You can just chat back and forth with your therapist. And if it's cost that's preventing you from using the service, email customer support, because they will go above and beyond to make sure that you can afford those services.
I just love that BetterHelp is so different from traditional therapy because it is an online platform. It really puts into perspective how you can hang up the old ways of therapy with BetterHelp instead of hanging yourself.
Exactly. I love the way you put that. You put that so perfectly.
I really tried. But what I really do love BetterHelp. I did use it one time, but unfortunately, I just could not keep up with it because of my personality, and like we said, not all treatments work for everybody. I have a very hard time with sticking to things due to my extreme off-task behavior. I've talked to you about the closet where passions go to die. So sticking with something is hard for me, and I know that may be one thing that people can do, one different area where they can talk about their things, but there is others, and that's one thing I hope we can help people with as well.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. So I did want to talk about, we're coming to the ending of this episode, and I want to discuss the next episode. We're going to be talking about mental health and relationships, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And before we come to the close of this episode, I want to give our friend Ryan Fowkes a shout out for all his guidance and advice that he's given us for the launch of our podcast, and plug in his coffee company. Again, this is not sponsored. The company is called Diggy Roast, and it's an online specialty coffee and artisan tea retailer based in Bloomington, Illinois. They specialize in freshly roasted specialty grade coffee beans and artisan teas. They design custom coffee branding on their coffee selections and often host fundraisers where they brand certain blends or flavored coffees with the logo and colors of a team, group, school, or organization. This is a unique way for groups to raise money and offer a great product. They are available on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or their website, diggyroast.com, and that's DIGIROAST.com. roast.com. I will link their website in the description of this podcast episode. And thank you again, Ryan, for all your guidance and support with this podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan. I also wanted to put a little bit in there. I knew absolutely nothing about podcasts. You had more knowledge than I did, but we relied on a lot of his advice, and we do appreciate it so much.
Yes, so
But
much.
one other thing we wanted to discuss is what we're going to call our listeners and our viewers. And we were thinking we're crazy. They might be a little crazy. You know, we all have something.
Psychotic, maybe.
I mean, there's something we all have. I don't want to say something wrong with us because I don't think there's anything wrong with mental health, but I do think we are all lunatics. So from here on out, we will be speaking to our listeners and viewers as our lunatics.
And I just love that so much because I don't want to say psychopaths. I mean, I know I'm a psychopath, but we don't know that everybody listening is a psychopath like I am.
We can't label all of our listeners as psychopaths, but we can label you as a little bit loony, a lunatic.
Looney Toony. All right. And if you've survived another day at war with your brain, you are superior. And we're wishing you nothing but peace in your soul, your mind, and another day of surviving until you can find your way of living.
And we will see all of you lunatics in 2 weeks on Trigger Warning Podcast.